Remember the defund the police movement, protests which dominated news headlines and politics in the summer of 2020? Well, some of the same progressive Democrats who supported making devastating cuts to law enforcement budgets stood up and applauded President Biden when he made this comment during his State of the Union address.
We should all agree the answer is not to defund the police. It's to fund the police. Fund them.
The president has proposed spending $1.3 billion to help fund law enforcement this fiscal year. So why this new level of support for police? Is this just smart election year politics or a sincere response to rising crime? Well, joining us to share some insights is former state prosecutor Joshua Crawford. Mr. Crawford is executive director of the Pegasus Institute, a public policy research organization based in Louisville, Kentucky. Josh, it's good to have you with us. So what's behind this shift in support for our men and women in blue?
I think you hit really on both points. I think part of it is practical politics, but I think part of it is also that we're now in our 7th straight year of rates of homicide and violence in our largest cities being sort of up or on par with the year that they were before. And we're in now the 3rd straight year of significant increases in homicides and violence in those communities. And so we know that funding the police and putting more police on the streets works. It's a well-researched policy solution. And so I think some of it stems from that as well.
And this $1.3 billion in law enforcement funding, is it too little, too late?
There's certainly part of that. It's certainly not going to undo some of the defunding that has happened over the last couple of years. And part of the problem with the injection of federal dollars into local police departments is sometimes local departments and local governments will just use that money to offset local cuts. And so you won't actually see more cops on the street. You'll just see federal taxpayers paying for something as opposed to local taxpayers. And so any injection of federal money, while a positive policy solution, ought to come with strings attached that require more cops end up on the street as a result.
We saw the largest single increase ever in the U.S. homicide rate. And some people say that's because people were confined to their homes during the pandemic. There were more domestic disputes leading to killings. So why do you think the homicide rate has jumped to historic levels?
Yeah, I think the important thing for your viewers to understand is that violence concentrates among a very small number of people. In any given city, it's about 0.5% of your population that's responsible for more than 50% of your violence. And that typically occurs within the subcontext of gang activity. Those individuals got more active, more violent over the course of the COVID-19 lockdowns, especially as in response to changes in law enforcement policy that took cops off the street, and then especially in places that saw defunding of the police and reductions in officers. But this has been going on in the country since 2015. There were substantial increases in homicides in the country, 2015 over 2014, then 2016 over 2015. Then we were sort of stagnant, and now we're seeing these increases again. So it's not simply a COVID problem. It's a bad policy problem.
And police officer retirements and resignations are way up. What role have defunding and the lack of respect and support for law enforcement officers played in that?
Yeah, defund the police has been successful, and I use the term successful here pejoratively in 2 ways. One, in practical defunding of police, cities that have actively reduced funding for law enforcement. But the other is to create this environment in which good cops don't want to be cops anymore. And so you have early retirement, you have folks leaving for more lucrative police departments, especially suburban and small city police departments. And then you have folks leaving the profession altogether. They can go get jobs that pay nearly as well, doing something that is less risky to their livelihood and in which they're not going to be disrespected on a regular basis. So the recruitment and retention problem has been exacerbated by the defund movement in a very serious way.
So, Josh, what do you think the answer is? Many politicians in the big cities are now pushing tougher gun laws, also gun buyback programs. But what do you think of those ideas?
Yeah, so the protection of public safety and the preservation of public order is primarily the responsibility of local police departments enforcing state laws. And so state and local governments are going to be your primary actors here. But there is a role for the federal government, and that is primarily in resourcing and then collaborations with federal agencies. We know what works to reduce urban violence. There's been 30 plus years of solid research on the things that work. And the things that work is to focus a combination of law enforcement and social service resources on the folks that are driving these problems, that small number of individuals within the subcontext of street gangs that are causing these problems and that are making life remarkably difficult for the overwhelming majority of law-abiding citizens in communities that folks even think of as high crime.
So quickly, your prediction in the upcoming election later this year. This is going to be a big issue, isn't it?
Absolutely. It was an issue in the most recent election. I think that's only going to increase in the 2022 election. And I think it's why you see a lot of high profile members of Congress coming out with plans to address this issue specifically. And I think you saw this play out in some local races in places like New York City, where now Mayor Eric Adams was elected on a platform not of defunding, not of abandoning law enforcement, but of public safety and preservation of public order. And that's in a city that tends to lean pretty far to the left. But those folks want safe streets and clean streets as much as anybody else.
Joshua Crawford, Pegasus Institute Executive Director. Thank you, Josh, for sharing your time and insights with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.